You know, the war that we see on our screens today, it didn't just start a few years ago. It is the violent climax of a story 1,000 years in the making. It's a story about shared roots, yes, but also about radically different journeys and a contested history that's been used as both a unifying myth and a devastating weapon. Let's trace this complex and heavy past together.
To really get what's happening behind the headlines and the political speeches, we have to peel back the layers of time. We have to dig into these powerful, conflicting stories that have forged two completely different national identities. This has never been just about land. It's about the very soul of a nation and its fight for the right to exist on its own terms.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start at the very beginning with the myth of a single origin. Then we'll trace the moments where these two paths split apart, look at the periods of domination, witness the unbelievable trauma of the 20th century, and see how Ukraine has fought tooth and nail to carve out its own future. And it all leads to this, how history itself has become a weapon on the front lines of this war. Okay, so our story begins right here, in the medieval state of Kievan Rus. Think of a flourishing, powerful civilization centered in modern-day Kyiv that lasted from the 9th to the 13th centuries. Both Russia and Ukraine trace their cultural DNA back to this place. But here's the thing. This shared cradle has become the central point of disagreement, the origin of two profoundly different national stories. See, at the very core of the Russian narrative is this powerful idea that Ukrainians aren't a separate people at all, but are little Russians, just a branch of one big Slavic tree whose destiny is, and always will be, tied to Moscow. And you have to understand, this claim isn't just some historical debate. It's the political justification for everything that's happening now. It's used to deny Ukraine's right to exist as its own country. And this is where you can see the two stories just completely diverge. On one side, you have this idea of a straight line, where the center of power just neatly moves from Kyiv to Moscow. In that version, Kievan Rus is simply chapter 1 in the history of Russia. But the Ukrainian perspective tells a totally different tale. It sees Kievan Rus as the wellspring of a uniquely Ukrainian culture. Its collapse wasn't just a transfer of power, it was a shattering event that sent the two peoples on completely different journeys. So, if Kievan Rus was the supposed single cradle, when did those cracks in the foundation really start to show up? Well, that brings us to the first major challenge to that whole one people idea, the period right after that great medieval state collapsed. This timeline really shows you the split. The Mongol invasions in the 13th century, they weren't just a bump in the road. They were a cataclysm that completely blew apart the political unity of the region. While the northern lands eventually gathered around a new power center in Moscow, the southwestern lands, what we now know as Ukraine, went down a totally different historical path. They were pulled into the orbit of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a completely different cultural and political universe. And this period forged a unique identity, leading to the rise of the Cossacks, these fiercely independent warriors who became the ultimate symbols of Ukrainian resistance. And this really drives home a crucial point. The idea of a smooth, seamless handover from Kyiv to Moscow, it's basically a historical fiction. The reality was a violent breakup. It created a power vacuum and a split that lasted for centuries. While one culture was developing under the thumb of autocratic Tsars in Moscow, the other was being shaped by European influences and a spirit of Cossack independence. They were, quite literally, becoming two different peoples. Now, this long divergence builds towards what might be the single most argued over event in their entire shared history. We're talking about the Treaty of Pereyaslav in 1654. This one agreement is held up by both sides as absolute proof of their story, and yet, they see it in completely opposite ways. And this is the fundamental question, isn't it? Was this the moment the little Russian brothers willingly came back home to Moscow, like the Russian narrative claims? Or was it a pragmatic, even desperate, military pact made by the Ukrainian Cossack leader to get a powerful ally against Polish rule? An alliance that was never meant to be a permanent surrender? I mean, the difference in interpretation here is just night and day. For Russia, this treaty is practically a sacred text of reunification, the historical bedrock for its sphere of influence. But for Ukraine, its legacy is one of tragedy. It's seen as the moment the door was cracked open for centuries of slow absorption, the gradual stripping away of their freedom. It was a strategic alliance that quickly turned into a trap. And when you look at what happened next, it really seems to back up the Ukrainian view. What followed wasn't a partnership of equals. It was a long, slow process of domination. By the 19th century, it all led to a policy of intense Russification. A prime example is the Ems Ukaz of 1876.
an official imperial decree that banned printing books in the Ukrainian language. That's not the act of a protective older brother. That is the act of an empire trying to erase a culture it sees as a threat.
And that history of domination, well, it reached its most horrific, violent peak in the 20th century. The Soviet experience would inflict wounds on the Ukrainian psyche so deep that they continue to shape the nation's resolve to this very day. This was a century of unimaginable suffering and brutal, systematic attempts to finally crush the Ukrainian national spirit for good. 3 events on this timeline really define the Ukrainian 20th century. First, you get this brief, fleeting taste of independence right after the Russian Empire collapses, but it's quickly crushed by the Bolsheviks. Then comes the Holodomor, a man-made horror on a scale that's hard to even comprehend. And finally, the crucible of World War II, where Ukrainian nationalists found themselves fighting a desperate two-front war against both the Nazis and the Soviets, cementing this legacy of resistance against any and all invaders. It is impossible to overstate the importance of the Holodomor in Ukrainian memory. The name itself literally means to kill by starvation. This wasn't a drought or a crop failure. It was a man-made famine engineered by Stalin's regime. In Ukraine, it is widely seen not as some tragic policy mistake, but as a deliberate act of genocide, a weapon used to smash Ukrainian peasant resistance and to break the nation's will to be free. Nearly 4 million people. Just let that number sink in. This isn't just a statistic. It's a foundational trauma, a national wound passed down through generations. It cemented a deep, deep distrust of Moscow's power and created this existential understanding that being under Russian rule could literally mean the end of the Ukrainian people. But the story of the 20th century isn't only one of victimhood. It is absolutely one of resilience. After the Soviet Union finally collapsed in 1991, Ukraine got its chance to forge its own independent path, a path that has consistently, deliberately led away from Russia and towards a European future. And you can see this clear, democratic, determined path they've been on since '91. That overwhelming vote for independence wasn't a one-off thing. It was the starting gun. 13 years later, when Moscow tried to rig their election, people flooded the streets in the Orange Revolution, peacefully demanding their votes be counted. Then a decade after that, the Euromaidan revolution was an even bigger confirmation of that choice, with millions demanding a future tied to Europe. Each step was a powerful cry for sovereignty, and each one was met with more and more hostility from a Kremlin that just refused to let go. And that brings us right up to the present day. All of these threads of history, the divergent paths, the broken promises, the centuries of domination, the unspeakable traumas, and that determined fight for freedom, they all converge right on the modern battlefield. This long, painful past is the fuel for the current fire. So you see, the fierce Ukrainian resolve we're witnessing today didn't just appear out of nowhere in 2022. It is the end result of everything we've just talked about. It's rooted in a deep, historically justified distrust of Russian state power. It's fueled by a national identity where the language, the culture, have themselves become symbols of resistance. Rejecting that condescending, little brother narrative isn't just politics. It's a personal defense against the erasure of their entire history of struggle. And that, ultimately, is the tragic legacy. A historical story, this myth of a single unified people flowing from Kyiv to Moscow, has been deliberately twisted and weaponized. It's now used as the pretext to deny the very existence of a separate Ukrainian nation, to invalidate its borders, and to justify a brutal, horrific war of conquest. This quote just captures the devastation perfectly. Any sense of a shared brotherly past, no matter how complicated it was, has been obliterated. It's been buried by the very power that claimed to be its guardian, a casualty of a war that was justified by a distorted version of that same history. And so, we're left with this question, a question with no easy answer. When history itself has been used as a weapon, and the truth has been one of the first casualties, what does the future even hold? Can two nations whose stories are so violently tangled together ever find a way to see each other's separate, legitimate histories, and build a peace based not on myth, but on mutual respect and on truth?